Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning and welcome to this Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Alex Hall, Vice Chairman of this committee, and will be your Chairman for this meeting. Can I remind you that the audio-visual feed of this formal public meeting is being recorded and will be accessible via the County Council's website following today's meeting. I would like to begin with a health and safety announcement. There is no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, we will need to leave the council chamber through the rear doors and leave the building through the reception into the front car park. We then need to wait in the car park until further instructions. Can I remind everyone to ensure their mobiles, laptops and iPads are on silent. If you wish to ask a question during the course of the meeting, can you please raise your hand? And can I also remind members of the committee to switch on their microphones when invited to speak close to their microphone and to switch their microphone off after making their contributions. Requests to speak will be collated by Chiara. We will now move on to the formal agenda. Robert, do we have any apologies for absence? I believe Councillor Rawlins isn't present.
Yeah, that's correct, Mr. Chairman. We've just received apologies from Councillor Rawlins, but we've got a full house otherwise.
Okay, that's great. Item 2, declarations of members' interest. Do any members wish to declare any interests? Councillor Rowe.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll need to leave for items 5 and 6 in relation to the North Highcombe Relief Road.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Item 3, minutes of the meeting of the committee on 13th of December 2021. This item is to approve and sign the minutes of the last meeting as a correct record. Please turn to pages 5 to 14 of the agenda pack. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Dyer and a seconder, Councillor Strangle. We will now vote. You are voting on whether you agree that the minutes are a correct record. All those in favour? That's great. I think that was a full house, wasn't it? So that's great. So thank you. Those minutes are agreed as a correct and accurate record. Item 4, announcements by the Chairman, Executive Councillors and Lead Officers. Executive Councillor announcements. Are there any announcements from Councillor Richard Davis, Executive Councillor for Highways, Transport and IT, or Councillor Cleo Purton-Williams, Executive Support Councillor for Highways, Transport and IT? Okay. Senior officers, are there any announcements from Karen Cassar, Assistant Director for Highways?
Yes, there is, Chairman. Thank you. Just to let the committee know that Paul Little, who was our Head of Asset Management Services, has now retired, and we wish him all the best. So we are now operating in Highways with 2 heads of service and myself, and we are going out to interview in February 22nd, 23rd. So service is as normal, but just really to let you know that we no longer have Paul Little with us, who's retired. Thank you.
Okay, Nicole Hilton, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Today the committee was expecting to see an item on the bus service improvement plan, but because we were going to be at the point of mid-consultation, it was agreed with you as Chairman that would be pushed forward into a future agenda. But it's just to say that last week local authorities received a letter from the Department for Transport, which has actually put the scheme on pause until further notice.
Okay, thank you for that. So on to item 5. This revenue capital budgets proposals 2022 to 2023. This item is on pages 15 to 24 of the agenda pack. This item invites the committee to consider and comment on the 2022-23 budget proposal implications for the Council's highways and transport services activities. The report will be presented by Keith Noyland, Head of Finance and Communities via Teams. In terms of the actions, the committee is invited to consider this report, and members of the committee are invited to make comments on the budget proposals. These will be considered by the executive at its meeting on the 8th of February 2022. Our comments, as recorded, will be submitted to the executive for their decision. Over to you, Keith.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. As the Chairman's already said, this report presents budget proposals for next financial year for highways and transport services for pre-decision scrutiny. On pages 15 to 17 of the pack, I've provided the context in terms of the 2021 spending review and provisional local government settlement. I think it's fair to say that most of that is not directly relevant to highways and transport, but it does provide the background to the overall council financial position. There isn't still no clarity on the implementation of local government funding reforms, so we're again presenting budget proposals for just a single year. The executive approved the budget proposals for consultation at their meeting on the 5th of January. That included a proposed 3% increase in council tax, which is the 3% adult social care precept deferred from last year. The proposed revenue budgets for highways and transport are presented in Table A, which is on page 18 of the pack. The table shows the movements from the current year's budgets in unavoidable cost pressures and expected savings. It excludes pay inflation, which has been budgeted at 2%, but is currently being held centrally pending agreement of any pay award. Provisions also been made in corporate budgets for inflation on energy costs relating to signals and street lighting, which will be allocated as a service once the utility contract rates are confirmed, so that also not in that table. These budgets now include the budget for providing educational transport, home to school transport, which was previously reported under children's services, and that's the source of the most significant cost pressure at 6.546 million. There's an awful lot going on in passenger transport market at the moment that are impacting costs. National living wage increases, inflationary challenges, a national driver shortage, a shortage of passenger assistance, rising fuel prices, and high operational costs, particularly driven by the public service vehicle accessibility regulations. So they're all having an impact, driving that cost pressure. There's a transformational program underway, which will focus on developing new procurement approaches, overall of routing and demand management, in order to reduce the impacts of external factors on costs. The forecast is to secure 1.239 million of cost reductions in year one, which will then result in a net budget increase for home to school transport of 5.3 million. The other significant cost pressure is in highways asset management, where we provided for estimated inflation on the maintenance contract, driven largely by materials prices. We've also provided for the growth in the highways network, which inevitably has a knock-on effect to the cost of maintenance. Turning to capital budgets, Table B on page 21 sets out the proposed capital programme. The most significant changes for these services relate to the risks in the forecast costs for the major highway schemes, particularly those caused by material supply and price issues. Consequently, the budgets for both Grantham Southern Relief Road and Spalding Western Relief Road have been increased to fund the expected higher cost. That is still based on forecast costs though, so given the nature and duration of those projects, it could still change further. It's currently proposed to set the highways asset protection budget equivalent to the Department for Transport Highways Maintenance Block Grant, but as the amount has not yet been confirmed, it's currently shown as zero in that table. To ensure the short-term affordability of the programme and accommodate those increases in budgets, the uncommitted budgets for schemes that haven't yet started have been rephased into future years. Just touching on the timescales for the rest of the budget process, a consultation meeting with local business representatives, trade unions and other partners is scheduled to take place on Friday. The proposals are now live on Let's Talk Lincolnshire, with the opportunity for the public to comment, and the executive will make its final budget proposals on the 8th of February, which will then be considered by full council on 18th of February. Hopefully that summarises the main points. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I would now like to invite members of the committee to ask questions. Chiara, do you have any speakers?
Not Mr Chairman. Oh, we've got Councillor Dyer.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just a few questions, if I may. Page 22, 1.19, the inflationary increases for the various projects. Where is that additional funding coming from? Is that out of reserves, or is that just from the highways budget itself? On point 1.2, which is just below that, it raises the uncertainty around the reduced highways funding from government. If that, just theoretically, if that wasn't to be restored, and or the council weren't to make that £12 million up, what impact would that have on our highway network? I've seen the press releases, but how many potholes? What impact would that have to the day-to-day lives of our constituents? In respect to the various schemes in the table toward the end of the report, and I may just have missed this. There was funding for the Rise Home and Netlham roundabouts on the A46. I know some work has been done to the Netlham roundabout, but is that completely complete now? Because I've noticed that there's no funding for future years. So I'm just wondering whether I think I was under the impression there was going to be lane expansions there as well, similar to the Rise Home roundabout. So just what's happening there? I may have missed works. And then finally, at the end of that table, there was reference to the £10 million that was put into the highways funding for this year in respect to B roads. Has that, Class B roads I mean, has that £10 million all been spent this financial year? Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, Keith, if you could respond to that, thank you.
Okay, I can certainly start off, and I think perhaps some support from Karen. In terms of the funding increases for the majors programme, they're effectively funded by deferring other schemes into the future. So it makes the short term affordable because this is generally funded by borrowing. So by deferring costs into the future, you put off the borrowing costs further into the future and therefore make the programme affordable. In terms of impact of the highways maintenance budget, Karen's probably best able to comment about the £12 million gap. Netlham is now complete as far as is currently planned. Again, Karen may wish to add something. And on the Class B roads, the £10 million is split between the current year and some will continue into the next financial year. The table was based on the forecast at the time it was prepared. So I believe £7 million is now expected to be spent in 22-23 of that £10 million budget.
That's correct, Keith. So the question in relation to the funding gap, the 12 million, just remind me again, Keith, what that question was, just so that I get it.
That's the impact of the £12 million not being restored.
Yeah, okay. What we are doing is working with Councillor Richard Davis and Councillor Cleo Powton-Williams, and we're looking at a funding strategy. We actually had a discussion this morning regarding it. So as part of our HIAMP, our Highways Infrastructure Asset Management Plan, we're actually reviewing and looking what the loss of that money will mean versus our life cycle plans that we have for each individual asset. So that work is ongoing. We're looking to do this over the next 12 months for what it will look like in the future. So yeah, it is being looked into, and we should be coming back once we've agreed with our executive members. And the final one, the 3 million was spent this current financial year, and as agreed with our executive members, and 7 million this forthcoming year. Have I answered everything correctly there? I think I have. Is that okay, Chairman?
I think Councillor Dyer, did you want to come back on that?
Yes, if I may. Thank you for those answers. Just two follow-up questions from those points. in respect to the larger schemes potentially being funded by deferring delivery of future schemes, is there any detail behind what is going to be deferred? I say that as a member where the Highcombe Relief Road goes through my division, so obviously that it flags concerns in my mind. And then in respect to the answer given to the £10 million additional funding this financial year, and we've only spent 3. If we've only spent 3 this financial year, are we guaranteed to spend that 7 for the next financial year? And just, I suppose, if the highways funding wasn't, if government weren't to top it back up and the executive weren't minded to increase it in other ways, do you think that £7 million would be better spent pumping back into highways funding so that we can get on with general repairs rather than Class B roads? As a question posed, I know there's been some repairs in my division with that. Well, I say additional 10, but only 3 million have been spent. And whilst they're very nice, and I know the residents are happy, those roads perhaps wouldn't be a priority for me that have been done. So I'm just wondering whether that money is better spent elsewhere.
Okay, so if I take the first one, the larger schemes, there's currently a paper being prepared for our executive member, Councillor Davis. So we are currently working on that, and at the moment, until it's gone to Councillor Davis for sign off, I can't share further details on that, but we are looking into it, unless Councillor Davis would like to add anything there. But as an officer, we have provided the information. In relation to the spend, the 7 million and putting it back into the funds, again, we can take that back and we can discuss further with our executive members just to see what their preference would be in terms of, do we follow the traditional highways asset management plan approach where we put it into the assets, or are we going to do it in the local roads? So again, 2 items there that I will take back to our executive member to discuss and run through and put some thoughts and some recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Yeah, thank you. Good points. I mean, one of the things I would say is, in terms of the split funding, is that one of the issues with one-off lumps of money is if you don't know you're going to get it, you can't plan to spend it. And there's a real, I think, a risk where you try and spend money too quickly that you don't plan and therefore you don't spend it efficiently. Hence why you tend to back end spend most of it in the second period, because quite often, say for even a relatively small resurfacing scheme, it can take several months to design. So it makes sense that we do it that way. In terms of taking money away from local roads funding, I think I'm minded not to agree with you on that, simply because I think the council made the decision that it was going to go to local funds. So I think to reposition it at this stage would potentially be a mistake. But I am minded that one of the most difficult things we have to do is spend money in accordance with the highways asset management strategy, which does often look, and I don't mean this at all patronising, but it's going to sound patronising, to the untrained eye, like we're spending money on roads that don't need it. And it's almost a little bit like the Head and Shoulders argument. You're probably too young to remember the television advert where characters used to wander around saying, oh, but why do you use Head and Shoulders? You don't have dandruff. Well, that's exactly the point, that we really intervene most and most effectively where the road has yet to get into a state at which you would notice it. And that is often very difficult because it does seem as that we are repairing roads and people say, well, you didn't need to do anything. There's nothing wrong with that road. You know, Church Street is like the crater of like the surface of Mars. Why aren't you doing that? Simply put, because the small amount of money we're spending wouldn't make an impact on Church Street, whereas actually on this other road it would protect it for 20 years. So that's the slight perversity. But I will accept that I think we're going to have to make some difficult decisions, particularly around the capital programme. I think it's too early at this stage to say what those impacts are going to be, but I appreciate your sensitivity, particularly around North Highcombe Relief Road. I think it's perhaps one of the safer schemes because we have had committed government funding. I think it would be a big step to pull a scheme as substantial as that that's already that far in and down the process, if that can give you any kind of answer.
Just a thanks for both Richard and Karen for those answers.
Yes, thank you. Are there any other questions?
Councillor Clark, please.
Councillor Clark.
It's not a question, it's a comment, and I'm sure it'll go down well. On funding from the government, was reading an interview from the Lincoln MP where he was talking about funding. He referenced the method to stick and carrot for the funding. It seems the county receive a lot of stick without a lot of carrot. We got the fair deal, £12 million cut in highways. I do wonder how the next cuts will be dressed up. It's a shame a budget is assembled under these conditions. Thank you.
Can I just...
Yeah, Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just please, I'm very pleased, Councillor Clark, that you're paying such close attention to what our esteemed MP is saying, and I'm sure I'll be pleased to hear that you're reading his literature and output so keenly. I will make sure he receives, and I pass on your good thanks and warmth to him.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Richard Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's with regards to the transport services, home to school, everything being brought now under the highways budget. Just the views, really, of the executive member. Is this now the time to do a good examination of that service and the cost pressures that we see rising on there to make sure it's actually being used in the most effective way?
Okay.
Would you like me to take that one, Richard?
Well, I mean, the question was directed to me, but yeah, well, that's already underway. I mean, I think, have you not had a paper to scrutiny on where this has got to? Nicole is looking at this, and you're absolutely right, Councillor Wright. It's a huge expense, approaching £30 million a year, transporting 25,000 children every day to and from school. And I think it's fair to say that we could do it smarter and better. But there will be challenges around that, because I think we're going to have to take at times a tougher line. But Nicole is leading on this. I'm not sure what she did wrong in a past life to be now responsible for it, but equally that same could be said for me.
Yeah, just to echo Councillor Davis, we have identified home to school transport as one of the major transformation activities for Lincolnshire County Council. So there's an entire kind of structure and governance model around a fundamental review of educational travel. But because of the way in which we run it in Lincolnshire, it can't be entirely disconnected from the transport model in its wider in its wider auspice. So that fundamental review has begun. As Keith has identified, there are savings to be found and expected within the first year against a backdrop of a very, very challenging national picture. So as a local authority, we are not unique in this. However, the rurality of where our schools are and where people live and the county in general does add complexity to that challenge.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? No. Okay, thank you for the questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion for this item, and I move that the committee endorses this report and that our comments as captured are shared with the executive for their consideration on the 8th of February. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Dyer, thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Those against? Any abstentions? No, that's great. Yeah, thank you. Carried, thank you. So item 6, the local transport plan. This is a pre-decision scrutiny item. The report was shared as a supplementary item on the 19th of January. The committee is invited to consider and comment on the local transport plan prior to a decision being taken by the executive on the 8th of February 2022. The item will be presented by Jason Copper, the Transport and Growth Manager, infrastructure investment via Teams. In terms of the actions, the committee is invited to 1, consider the report and determine whether we support the recommendations to the executive as set out in the report, and 2, agrees that any additional comments to be passed on to the executive in relation to this item. Over to you, Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try and be as brief as possible because I appreciate that the report itself is fairly chunky. If anyone's taken the trouble of printing it out, I suppose just some key points around where transport's at the moment. The last local transport plan was actually approved by the council back in 2013, so it is some time since we've had a revision to that, and I think most members will be aware that quite a lot has happened in the transport world in that period of time, and we're perhaps a little overdue in terms of preparing a new local transport plan. But it is there, and it is set out for members to consider. Couple of points around transport itself. We've taken the view that transport is a means to an end. It's people don't generally travel for the sake of it. There is a purpose behind it. And from that, we've been able to identify six key themes around which we've based the local transport plan moving forwards, and those are identified within the report itself. Obviously, I think that they're all important, but part of the public consultation process was to test where people's views were around those particular themes, and it was very pleasing to see we received some very positive comments around the approach we've adopted. There were very minor number of dissenters, but none of those actually came forward and suggested any sort of suggested changes to that approach. They were just a little negative about it, which was unfortunate, but that's the way we go. I suppose the other key thing to draw to members' attention is the raft of appendices within that report. I know previously the cycling strategy has been through scrutiny. We've kind of swept that up and included it as part of the local transport plan because we felt if it sat on its own, it would perhaps it might get a little lost. So we've integrated that within LTP5. And that means that cycling is considered alongside walking and things like access to public transport as well. So it's looked at across and within the round. A couple other points probably worth making following the previous scrutiny panel before Christmas, where I know the rail industry attended, and there was a very good discussion and debate, and I think members were very pleased and keen to see that. Two of the appendices around rail as part of the local transport plan, which I did mention at the time. So we've got one looking at improvements to passenger transport services, and we've outlined what we'd like to see. And on the back of that as well, one around rail infrastructure, both for passenger and freight. And we're starting to work towards identifying some sort of specific interventions that may be needed to try and deliver the kind of passenger service and freight services that we'd like to see across Lincolnshire. I think that's really it from me, Mr. Chairman. I will hand back to you, and obviously here to take any comments or questions around it, and hopefully members will be happy with the results.
Thank you, Jason. Do we have any questions? Councillor Clark was first, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Got 3 questions. On the consultation being virtual, how does this respond? How does the response compare to the previous document? Partnership seems to be the key word. How will this work in practice? Will the district councils adopt the local plan? And the last one is bus usage seems to be in decline. Why then is there so much emphasis put on bus routes? Thank you.
Should I take those up, Chairman?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. Yes, in terms of the consultation, we did have a virtual only consultation this time around, partly because of the pandemic. I have to say, in my experience of delivering documents like this, and I've been involved with many over the years. I mean, the overall figures we had in excess of about 750, 760 actual survey responses, which I think is very good. In terms of hits on the website, we were up in the 2000s, 2000 plus. So we do know it got to a wider audience than it normally would have done, and actually in some of the age groups, like the under 25s, we actually managed to get not huge numbers, but certainly far larger than I think I've ever seen in an exercise of this sort. So I think overall our view was that the virtual approach was a success, was positive, and indeed we managed to reach people we perhaps haven't reached in the past, and overall the figures were up on this type of consultation. So yeah, I think that went well. Yeah, partnerships with many things around the transport world. We are reliant on other people to actually deliver. Yes, with the Highway and the Transport Authority, but a lot of our powers sort of stop at that point. Certainly, the bus industry is delivered very much by the private sector. The rail industries likewise, and Network Rail are responsible for the infrastructure. So we may have a list of things and a set of desires that we might like to see around the rail network, but it's not actually within our gift in the main to deliver much of that. So we do have to work very closely with partners. In specific relation to district councils, their role as the planning authority, they do have to prepare a local plan. As our starting point within local transport plan development, we did a thorough review of all of those local plans across the whole of Lincolnshire to identify what it is they were trying to achieve and how we could better integrate both the transport and the land use planning. Something that I think it becomes actually critical for the delivery of this. So I like to think, yes, we've worked well with the district councils on this, and we will continue to work and develop those relationships and that partnership. The final question around bus usage in decline, it is particularly, it's been noticeable. I mean, the pandemic has been catastrophic, I think it's fair to say, for all public transport, both road and rail, so bus and train. To the point where the rail industry was carrying at the worst points only 10% of its normal patronage, which is quite worrying. I suppose the emphasis within the document it's to try and reverse that decline. The buses still do carry as a form of public transport. They carry many millions of people across the country on a daily basis. In certain parts of Lincolnshire, we still have car ownership levels that are relatively low in some of the urban centres. So the bus becomes actually a critical way of moving about. So yeah, it's there, and I know Nicole's already referenced the bus service improvement plan. The bus strategy within this local transport plan has set a framework for that, and it is perhaps a little unfortunate that the DFT have chosen to sort of park or slow down the approach around buses, because I think it is critical for a large number of people.
Thank you. Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman. I support the report and the approach taken on the consultation. But there was a lot to get through from when we received this on Wednesday evening to, it was a lot of work to get through and read this, and we could do with this sort of length of report, we could do with it a little bit earlier, please, because it was a lot to get through. But what I did is I concentrated on the Appendix C, the consultation responses, because I think the way we've done the consultation, the way we've constructed it and everything was really good. And and I see there was a lot of positive feedbacks in that consultation, but there's one or two things that it prompted with me. I've been a bit parochial because I was looking at some of the South East Lincolnshire Council partnership responses, and on page 93 there's a place there where at the bottom where they've supported the framework defined within the themes, very supportive through that, but at the end they said that the LTP5 needs to be more closely connect to and reference the key sub-regional projects within these themes. Well, mostly on the consultation, there is then a response from LCC, but on that particular one, there's no response and no change given. So I just wondered, I wondered whether we perhaps read the start of that statement saying that there was support in it, and missed the last little bit on page 94. So that was question about that, because I think if we're just going to note something, we should be giving we should be just giving a reason why we're not going to change something when somebody's asked for it to be changed. The other thing is, I presume in where we've got red type in and say that we're going to change something, that will be changed going forward. Obviously, it's not on the consultation document, but those are changes that are going to be made going forward. The other thing was the chapter 2. There's a reference there to major roads in the county, and it's the A17's missing off the list of major roads. Now there was feedback on that in the consultation document, that the A17, the A1, A15, A16, A46, A52 are all there, and the A17 is not listed, and that's on page 25 in chapter 2. And our response to that was that the A17 is mentioned on maps and other sections going forward, but I would have still thought it ought to have been in the headline of roads listed as major roads within Lincolnshire, because A17 is a real major road. So the fact that it is mentioned on action plans and things going forward, I would have thought it still needs to be in on that page 25. Then we have got there's a lot of reference in our responses to the LTP5 implementation plan, and that is still being developed. And I was wondering if we could have some comments on how that's been developed going forward, and how long that will take. Presumably that the implementation plan is a bit of a living document that will keep getting changed as we move forward within the LTP. But I just thought it would be nice to have some comments on how that will be developed going forward. Yeah, and then there are quite a few, there's references to local transport strategies as well. And the other thing, there is a block plan in the report on page 10 in the report prior to the actual LTP consultation document, and it shows how all the different strategies and fit into the local transport plan, and and I thought I couldn't find it within the local transport plan itself, and I just wondered if that be worth including that block diagram or within the local transport plan somewhere up front, because it would explain to people reading the LTP how all these other strategies and everything will feed through into the plan and be taken care of within the LTP, because sometimes with an overarching document like the LTP, people read it and they say, well, this is missing, that's missing, the other's missing. If that block diagram was in there, I just felt it would explain to people up front how it all fits together. Sorry if that's gone on a bit, Chairman, but that's...
No, it's fine.
Yeah, I'll stop there.
No, it's fine. Can Jason respond to that, please?
Yes, I'll do my best. I think I've got a note of all of those. Come back to me if I've missed anything. We can start at the end first. I think that's a really good idea, Councillor. The reason I put that diagram together in the committee report was to try and show in one place how the relatively complex, let's be honest, relationships and interrelationships of all these different bits and pieces fit together. And if he's found that useful and easy, and it's helped him to understand that complex process, then yeah, absolutely, I think we certainly can include that in the LTP, subject to the executive being happy with that, and I see no reason why they wouldn't. Just moving back then, the implementation plan itself. Yes, I mean, I suppose the simplest answer in the short term is that actually until the formal strategy, i.e. the direction of travel, the objectives, the stuff we want to try and achieve has been approved and agreed, it is difficult to actually say, well, actually, what schemes, what interventions are we going to put in place to deliver it? We do kind of have to set that in train first. I think obviously we can't wait till the end. So we have started to develop, and it's included within the kind of the summary document, the prospectus of the LTP. We did put forward, suggested a number of ideas and approaches that we could adopt across Lincolnshire, and again they were consulted upon, and there is some figures around how well that's been received, and again in the main generally some positive response, particularly around things like active travel, supporting improvements to the rail network, etc. So yes, you're right, absolutely, it does become a living document, and it is something we're working on at the moment. A couple of key points around that. We were looking at electric vehicle charging points, and we're also looking at some rail work, and as you heard at the last scrutiny panel, Network Rail are about to commission a very significant piece of work, which we will be working closely with them on. We'll also do some stuff on the A1 as well, which is obviously a crucial link for Lincolnshire. So that's sort of runs in parallel to this. A17, including that within the list, again, I have no problem. That's probably just an oversight, just in the sheer volume of stuff we've got. So apologies for that if it's been left out of the list. But I think it has been included quite a number of times in a number of places. So, but yeah, absolutely happy to do that. What else do we have? Oh, the question around the South East Lincolnshire. I think you might be right, actually, in terms of the comment. Yes, they wanted to work more closely with the sub-regional projects. I think probably I should have included a comment in there that as the implementation plan starts to be developed, that's the location for any specific comments that have been identified in that area. So again, I can make an adjustment to that and include that as part of the recommendations. So yeah, apologies, a bit of an oversight there as well. I think that's all the questions I got down, but forgive me if I've missed one.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. That's fine. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chairman. I haven't really got questions. I've got comments. My first comment, well, actually was picked up by Councillor Brooks. To me, this was all done on an unacceptable time frame. Wednesday afternoon, late on Wednesday afternoon, just was not acceptable. Not for somebody like me, I'm afraid. Thank you. Right, but I accept that probably wasn't within your gift, Jason, so you're just the messenger. Right, one or two more comments then. It was mentioned, I think, by Councillor Clark about bus services being less well used. I have what may seem a very inane comment. If you haven't actually got any particular service, then you can't use it. Can you? Very, very obvious. I mean, look at this. I live on the fringe of Boston, really, really on the fringe of Boston. But I haven't got a bus. So by the time I've gone to find a bus, well, I might as well go all the way in my car. I haven't got a train that takes me anywhere sensible. even when, you know, when I've driven up to the station. So I don't use the train. You know, this is the problem. If we haven't got those services in the first place, then it's not surprising people don't appear to be using them. Right. 2 other comments. Am I thinking it was this document? I picked up a comment about contributions from 106, or was that elsewhere in these papers? I don't know whether somebody can help me over this, developer contributions. Was that in here or was that elsewhere? It was in here, right. Again, looking at it, I'm sorry to look at it parochially, but all the 106 contributions, well, almost all of them in our area, go on for affordable housing. And that trumps everything. So unfortunately, anything to do with the roads, anything to do with other infrastructure, just doesn't get covered. Right, and now my final thing, freight. We've got just to the south of us, well, south on the A17, haven't we, the Food Valley. We want to get freight to that Food Valley. Some comes in from the Humber ports. Some stuff will hopefully more come in from the Port of Boston. Other fresh produce comes in from around Lincolnshire. But we've got to get that produce or other items to the Food Valley. And from the Humber to get to Hull Beach, you go halfway around the county. This just isn't sense, is it? And we haven't got the roads to Boston, to our port in Boston anyway, so they come through the town. Is this lack of infrastructure? And, you know, with all of these comments that I'm making, where do we go with this, please? Right, the plans, in theory, are great, provided you can do it. Now, I feel at a disadvantage. I've come fairly new to this committee. I've been on council long enough, but I've not been on this committee. My home is sort of environment and economy, so this is a new, and I don't know whether I've missed something in previous years. So, you know, can someone help me out, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Oster. Councillor Davis, please.
Thank you. I'll address some of those points in the valid. I mean, in terms of the access to Boston, I mean, there was a plan some years ago for a Dock Link Road, and I believe your husband was leader of the Borough Council at the time when the scheme got pulled, so he's probably in a better position to explain to you than me than what happened with that particular scheme. In terms of 106 contributions, I agree. I mean, I think we've seen here in Lincoln, in particular more very recently, that the power and desire for central government to build housing seems to trump everything. In terms of 106 amalgamations and dispersals, that's not something that Lincolnshire County Council has much sway over, unfortunately. It tends to be, I think, as you probably know, a district council function, and they decide where the money goes. We put representations in, and I've seen it in my patch in Grantham as well. You know, the focus and the push for affordable housing, although depending on who you speak to, you can't seem to get a consistent agreement as to what that actually means, does mean that other things do miss out, and roads is very often at the bottom of that particular pile. So I'd share my concerns with that. I think what this plan is trying to do is to develop, and the implementation plan will put some meat on the bone, and a strategy for how we want the transport network to be. But as Jason rightly pointed out, the problem is a lot of it is outside of our direct control, and we do try and get partners to buy into that sense of a direction of travel, if you pardon the pun. The reality is, though, what tends to happen is the moment something bigger comes along, and we've seen this around where what should have been contributions towards the Lincoln Eastern Bypass from partners, when they had a better option to spend the money, they dissolved the agreement and took the money elsewhere to spend on other projects. So that is a frustration. And one of the things I would hope for is with local government reorganisation is an opportunity to streamline the process, so at least we all pulled in the same direction. And I think most residents would agree with you, Alison, that they would like to see more money spent on roads, public transport. And just on your final point, and I've been to your house and when we've done a ward walk, the harsh reality is, like me, we both live in areas that are never going to see a great deal of public transport. And I think suggesting that that's likely to change, you'd know I was lying to you. What we can do is make a real difference. You imagine if you were driving from where you are on the south of Boston into Boston to catch a train, for example. You imagine all of those people who live within a third of a mile of Boston, who are currently driving, actually were on a bus, the difference it would make to your journey to and from, the centre of Boston. So it's not about everybody changing what they do. It's just certain people making different choices. And I think the one thing that comes out of the consultation for me, and also some of the stuff around buses, is that actually people do want alternatives. The problem is, like you and me, too often we feel our only option is to get in the car, whereas in reality sometimes it would be convenient to have options. And I think this strategy is about giving people choices. Hopefully that helps a bit.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Dyer.
Thank you, Chairman, and not wanting to sound like a broken record, but the time committee were given to read this report I don't think was substantive. I think I certainly haven't been able to go through it in the detail that I'd like, so I think that's been echoed by several colleagues, so just so that's noted again, Chairman. In terms of what I did pick up though whilst going through the report, I think early on in the report it delves into bus transport, and I know it does later on. Even in urban areas where I suppose in Councillor Austin's case you would say it's a regular bus service, places in Lincoln for instance, and where I represent just outside of Lincoln, even though it may be classed as a regular bus service, actually it isn't, especially when you look at bus services in the evenings for instance, where there isn't any service in some parts of Greater Lincoln. So there's still improvements that could be made there, and it is a regular complaint that I get. And that reduction in bus patronage over time, I think there was reference made to COVID having an impact. I take that point, but actually you can see that decline's been happening long before COVID. So I don't think we should blame it all on COVID. And I think we need to reflect actually on the figures of vehicle uses across Lincolnshire, and the car still trumps, as you can see. So I think as a council, I don't think we should bury our heads in the sand and spend all of our time looking at cycling, rail and bus services, when actually the vast majority of the people we represent use a car on a daily basis. And whilst we need to make improvements to rail, bus and cycling infrastructure, I really don't think we can forget about the highway improvements as well. That is what the vast majority of our constituents use. And I suppose moving on that point, obviously we can look at more sustainable modes of cars, and I know there's a large section of this report devoted to the electric vehicle charging strategy. Before I come on to that, I do know I think both North Kesteven and the City of Lincoln, within their feedback, they both highlighted that they wanted to get, they were supportive of the EV charging. I think they were keen to get going. That was indicated there, and I can see a smile on Councillor Wright's face over there. But just in respect to the EV charging strategy, can we get some more detail? Reading that, I got the impression, and I don't disagree with that impression, that actually we need to let other partners lead in respect to funding EV charge points. So I think private sector taking the strain. I agree with that in places like Lincoln, Boston, Grantham, urban areas. But can you see a case where in rural areas where there isn't a case for the private sector to get involved? Are LCC planning at all to support parish councils with funding bids, or even potentially stepping in where possible, where there is a case to be made for EV charge points? Because I don't think there's any mention at all there in respect to LCC putting its own hands in its pockets in respect to that section, especially as I think the whole EV charge strategy does seem to indicate that the authority are keen to accelerate rollout. Yeah, and I may have missed this in the report, and I did try and find further detail on it, and I couldn't. On page 56 of the report, there is a graphic that has a clean air zone graphic on there, and I cannot see any reference in the report, and I have tried to control F to find reference to a clean air zone. I'm just wondering, is there any clean air zone being investigated at all? That's something that concerns me. I know that's something that's being rolled out in Manchester at the moment, and that's causing a lot of concern, because at the end of the day, with clean air zones, it's just another tax on working people trying to commute to their place of work or go shopping. So I'd be really concerned if we're looking into something like that, especially in the most urban setting in the county, Lincoln. I know there are a couple of pinch points where there is a concern for carbon emissions, but that data that I have is pre the Lincoln Eastern Bypass, so I would be curious to know actually what impact the Lincoln Eastern Bypass has had on air quality in the centre of Lincoln. There you go, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Davis, please.
Thank you. I'll come back on a few of those points, and then maybe Jason or somebody will come in and correct me. In terms of air, I'll go in reverse order. Air quality, we've got no plans to bring in a clean air zone. Air quality action plans are a key consideration of the local transport boards. I know particularly at Boston, Grantham and Lincoln, it's something that the district councils who are responsible for that are keenly investigating, and one of the big outcomes of roads like the Lincoln Eastern Bypass and the Grantham Southern Relief Road is the potential to improve air quality, because as we all know, the biggest single cause of air pollution in our towns is stationary traffic. So it's right up there as something we are considering. But I would agree with you that to tax people for even more heavily for going about their business is a decidedly distasteful thing to do. In terms of EV charging, I hear what you're saying in terms of the council putting our hand in our pocket. We've no immediate plans to do that. I think you could almost draw an analogy between the EV network and the superfast broadband network. We as an authority stepped in late in the day, in my view, not criticism of the council, but just local authorities generally came late to the party because rural areas were missing out. Particularly I'm thinking kind of places like East Lindsey, for example, even now are some way behind, as are West Lindsey to a lesser extent, in terms of their rollout of superfast broadband. And I think it wasn't until we as an authority kind of took over responsibility for just pointing out what was going on in a very simplistic terms, have we seen the big players come to the market. And now, for example, in the south of the county, we've got 2 or 3 major operators bringing fibre optic cables in. And I say that because I think it's quite analogous with the EV market. I think you're right. In places like Lincoln, it'll be relatively straightforward. We're looking to follow the Hampshire model in terms of allowing people to charge on the street. But I think there will be black spots, or not spots as you might call them, where unless we at least highlight it and do what we can, there is a danger people will miss out. I would be nervous slightly about getting too carried away, because while, of course, EV technology is everything everybody's talking about at the moment, let's not pretend there aren't other options on the table. And the reality is the internal combustion engine for large parts of Lincolnshire will be a reality, I think, at least for the next 20 years. So I think to rule that out. But I think what we can do at this stage is at least monitor what's going on. So if we can see any glaring emissions, we can start flagging up and then potentially come back and say, look, we need to do something. I would caveat it though, the big problem with electric cars for Lincolnshire is the supply, because until you can get decent power, and I know, for example, in Boston, where there was plans, but ironically, one of the country's leading suppliers of charging points and things is based, there are real problems with some developments getting enough power there in order to put super fast charging points in. And I think that's maybe something we could work on and then allow the private sector to worry about the detail after that. Jason will pipe in if I've said anything too horrifically wrong.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Davis. Is there anything, Jason, that you would like to add?
I think Councillor Davis did a very, very good job. He's clearly been listening very hard to what we've been saying to him. The only other thing I would just say is, in terms of EV charging, yes, we are doing some work at the moment, looking at where potentially the best places might be to look at, to support EV charging. But I think the issue around identifying it's where market failure is going to be, where the private sector is not going to step in, is probably the places that seem the most sensible.
Thank you for that, Jason. I know concerns have been raised by members about the timescale of receiving the local transport plan. So, Chiara, you would like to just have a word about that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of the timeliness of the report and appendices circulation, thank you very much for your comments. They're very welcome. And I would like to just make a note and assure you that we've made every effort and we keep making every effort to get all documents across to you. And we do respect the fact that it was a great volume of information for you to digest. So this note has been taken and we will reflect on this in the next time. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chiara. Do we have any further questions? Councillor Wright?
Thank you, Chairman. It's with relation to, I won't go into the EV thing, keep that going, but with relation to buses, then I disagree with something that's been said this morning about if there's no bus you can't use it, because it is a bit like chicken and egg. And I know where there's services that have been put on, they've not been utilised, then the operator can't actually continue with that because it's not worthwhile, especially when something like 80% of the passengers on there, the few are on there, are on concessions. So it makes it unviable. And so it is very much that quite often people like to see that something's there, but they don't actually use it, and we can't afford nowadays to do that. You know, those days, I mean, when I grew up, there used to be a bus literally every 10 minutes from not far outside where I lived that went into town, but that doesn't exist anymore. I think what I would like to see is that where we're looking at bus services is that, and I know this will come through, but there needs to be some intelligence applied to it. That if, for instance, there's been lots of people saying, oh, we want a town bus to do shopping, and I've got experience of this in a town I won't name, and it happened. And what happened? It had to stop because nobody got on it because they still like getting in the car and driving half a mile, congesting the streets, trying to find parking spaces, and then slamming the local authority for charging them for parking. You know, when they could have got on a bus. But yet, the nighttime economy, we've been let down massively, as came out of the last scrutiny meeting, with regards to the rail timetable. Excuses have been used for delays, for emergency timetables, and the service that was promised along a certain line, especially for getting into Lincoln, for the nighttime economy, has not been delivered, and I have no faith it's going to be delivered in the next couple of years either. So what I would like to see is, if we are looking at buses, and especially in the shorter term, if their bus services are unviable and they can be switched, then we should be looking at what economy they're serving rather than just who's shouted the loudest at one particular survey, because I think, for instance, in some of our towns and villages, a nighttime bus service would be far more effective than a daytime one that's empty.
Thank you. Jason, can you respond to that? You're on mute, Jason.
Sorry, my apologies. Yeah, no, I think Nicole's got her hand up. I think she could probably answer that better than me, given it's a specific about operational bus stuff.
So, Nicole, would you like to come in?
Thank you. Yes, I think the bus service improvement plan and the national approach enables and allows for exactly what Councillor Wright has just described. So the entire process that sits behind it is an ability to gather that real-time intelligence between patronage numbers, impact of COVID, the best way in which to do routing, the most efficient value for money, jointly with operators. So as part of the bus service improvement plan, there is an enhanced partnership approach which pulls or enables or forces operators to have to work really closely in a partnership with a very clear governance model around it, with local authorities in order to do exactly that. And it enables us to jointly look at the most effective model that we can give. You're absolutely right. That kind of mantra of you will build it and they will come doesn't necessarily always translate into reality. But equally, we do know that our transport on demand, so what people would recognise as Call Connect, it is possibly the most efficient and agile model for a rural area that we could establish. So there is no area in Lincolnshire that isn't covered by a bus service. It's just not that traditional route of standing by the side of the road waiting every 10 minutes for a bus to come along. And the direct transport or the transport on demand model enables people to call and schedule a bus at their convenience to come and pick them up. And for Lincolnshire, that has proved to be a very efficient model. It's a little bit disappointing that the bus service improvement plan is on hold at the moment, but there's a whole series of reasons and rationales behind that. And once the funding decision is made in February, we'll be working really closely with stakeholders, including our district colleagues, as to how best to utilise that funding and what schemes that we would promote and prioritise. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Do we have any further questions? No? That's great. Thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item. I move that the committee endorses this report and recommendations as set out on page 5 of the report, and that our comments as captured are shared with the executive for their decision on this item on the 8th of February 2022. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Dyer. We will now vote on this item. All those in favour, please raise their hands. Those against? No. Thank you, that is agreed. So on to item 7. I'll just wait for Councillor Rowe, if you don't mind. Welcome back, Councillor Rowe. So item 7, Civil Parking Enforcement Annual Report 2020-21. This item is on pages 25 to 68 of the pack. It invites us to consider and comment on the annual parking report 2020-21, which covers the period from the 1st of April 2020 to the 31st of March 2021. The item will be presented by Matt Jones, Parking Services Manager via Teams. The actions that the committee is asked to consider is to review and note the contents of the parking report and to approve the report is published on the council's website. Over to you, Matt.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, apologies for the delay in bringing this report to committee. Usually I try and get it across by September-ish time, but unfortunately due to sickness and annual leave, it's been pushed back into today's date. So I have to rewind a bit because obviously this is the 2020-2021 financial year that I'm going to be talking about, and we have already implemented various changes since then. So I'll extract the kind of key parts of the report itself, and happy to take any queries or questions if there were any. Okay, so to begin with, the report is introduced by Councillor Richard Davis. Obviously, the 2020-2021 period of time we were experiencing lockdowns, and it did have an impact upon the parking service that we provided. We scaled back our enforcement. We were still visible on street and providing advice and help when required, but the service was scaled back quite drastically in the end. As lockdowns became, as we ended a lockdown, our officers provided a valuable resource and helped with the reopening of the household waste recycling centres. So we had officers on site in various spots around the county, assisting with the click and tip service. Again, we experienced a high volume of visitors to our coastal areas, so we had to adapt to enforcing and providing a service more frequently than we have been historically to our coast, where there was a lot of people visiting the beaches and some of the coastal country park. As we know, Lincolnshire itself is an extremely large county. We don't have a huge amount of resource. We're around 20 officers with supervisors as well, and we allocate patrols around the county dependent upon traffic flow, size of areas, the amounts of parking restrictions in place, and we adapt as time goes on to the needs of residents and visitors, and we can kind of tinker with patrol patterns when required to ensure that we visit and patrol key spots when applicable. We do receive many comments from members of the public, and I thought it was useful to highlight some of the positive comments and remarks that we have from our visitors and residents. That's highlighted on pages 33 and 34. I think being so visible out on street in a uniform with Lincolnshire County Council on clothing and parking enforcement, quite often the officers are a first point of contact for members of the public on street. And I've been out myself many a time, and it's surprising the amount of people who do come up and either say thank you for kind of patrolling a local area, if it's a resident permit area, or limited waiting bays outside shops, and also asking just for general advice as well. So we provide that kind of communicative service as well as the enforcement service that they're more commonly known to provide. We continue to apply a very firm but fair enforcement process. We echo that from our procedures manual and parking policy that we have in place. I'll touch upon some of the areas of service that we provide our residents as well. We have the power to suspend parking bays, and the report on page 38 details why and how we do that, broken down by month and area. And similarly, we issue parking waivers, which are an allowance to a motorist to park on a restriction if they require close access to a property. For example, if someone is undertaking works at a local house and they are restrictive on terms of the parking, say if there's a yellow line or if there's a resident bay or a limited waiting bay, we keep track of how many we issue, where we issue them as well as the year goes on. We have always worked in close tandem with our blue badge team. Our officers obviously inspect disabled badges, blue badges throughout the course of a day, and we can also assist with any misuse reports that have been submitted. So we feed back to our blue badge team, who then carry out the next step in the process. So the report highlights the numbers that we've assisted with, and also the number of badges that have been issued throughout the county. We've always published on the Lincolnshire County Council website an interactive map in terms of where parking restrictions are located, and this is in place to aid a visitor or whoever it may be who wishes to visit an area of the county to ascertain what restrictions are in place. Moving down the report, one of the key elements of the previous year, which was impacted upon by the pandemic, highlighted on page 45, was the way that we enforce outside schools across the county and how we monitor non-compliant parking, whether that be on zigzag lines or double yellow, single yellow lines, things like that. Previously, we had a trial of a CCTV vehicle, and we had a working group 2 or 3 years ago that established that the trial scheme would come to an end on the basis of us providing a more visual service, that being specific enforcement officers walking up and down outside schools, as opposed to a vehicle with a camera pointing at some zigzag lines, which was helpful in a sense of visually it could be seen, but there was little interaction between the officer and motorists, or actually having the ability to walk up and down streets outside the schools as well. So I've tried to highlight in this report how it's been beneficial to have additional resource to provide this enforcement practice outside schools, albeit in 2020 schools were closed for a significant portion of the year, so some of the data is skewed a little bit. But on page 46, I've highlighted whereabouts in the county we've enforced, and also the number of observations as well, which is quite key considering for a significant period of time we weren't able to actually enforce. We've always tried to interact with our customers and members of the public in the best way possible, and we always take feedback, whether it be from members or from members of the public themselves who report non-compliant parking to us. We have channels in place which have moved on quite significantly since the period of time that this report focuses on. But I've highlighted how many requests have been received by us and what we've actually then achieved or how we've attended those requests. Just a very brief update, because now we actually have a more interactive way of members of the public reporting these requests to us, and we are able to provide valuable feedback as well. And historically, we've never been able to do that because of the service that was in place previously was merely an answer phone service that was then picked up and acted upon. During COVID times, a year or so ago, obviously a lot of our events were cancelled, and I always try and focus on what parking services can do for to aid and assist with events around the county. But instead of that, I've highlighted a new element that came in for pavement cafe licenses back in 2020, 2021, and those are highlighted on page 48. Moving forward, the next few pages of the report highlight some of the innovation that we've tried to implement within the service. I've touched upon the way members of the public can report nuisance parking or non-compliant parking, and since this report, as I said, we've taken that to the next level now, and we found our feedback has been positive, a more easy to use system, and like I said, it's providing feedback this time as opposed to previously when we haven't been in a position to do that. We always look at how we display and make our data public and transparent. I think looking at ourselves in comparison to a vast majority of other local authorities, we provide a huge amount of publicly accessible data through our website via various interactive maps, which can be really broken down via an area name, a road name, a type of ticket issued, what's been paid, what hasn't been, appeals, everything and anything. So all of this is available via freedom of information, and we felt it was beneficial to make this easily accessible to the public, and I've touched upon that within the report as well. Moving forward, I'll skip some of the parts which are to do with the day in the life of an enforcement officer, but we interviewed 3 or 4 officers who provided some content for the report as well, and how they felt that beneficial it was for them to undertake the role of an enforcement officer. The number of penalty charges that we issued in 2020, 2021 was reduced by around 10,000 based upon our scaling back of the enforcement process. So we issued just over 24,000 that year. And that can be replicated or can be seen on page 60, where we provide a breakdown of the reasons for issuing parking tickets. Near enough all of them are in the minus figures, and that's purely on the basis of not patrolling as often as we had been previously. Our appeals that we receive have always been quite consistent, to be honest, over the last few years within the parking service. We received around 2,000 challenges, and we always try and reply as quickly as we possibly can. Cases are always put on hold so they don't escalate or increase in value, and that can be replicated, or sorry, can be seen in our response times within the report as well. I've broken down on page 64 on a monthly basis how many are processed, what's been successful, what hasn't been. And again, our percentages in terms of cancellations are very similar to a national average, around sort of the 30 to 35% figure of cases being accepted. It doesn't necessarily mean parking tickets have been issued incorrectly. It does occasionally, but on the whole, there always can be valid reasons that justify a cancellation of a ticket. So we try and highlight that as well, and that goes forward to our independent traffic penalty tribunal, who can look at cases as well if a member of the public wishes to proceed further down the line. Someone completely independent from the council can review the issue of a ticket, determine if it was issued incorrectly or correctly, and our statistics and results from the tribunal are not the highest, but are one of the highest in success rates in the country, which I think shows the work that leads up to that point, whether it be the issue of the ticket on the ground or the way it's been handled in the back office, is shown in the results as well. To conclude the report, we've touched upon the finance, how much income has been received, how much the cost of the service was, and this is something that, again, we've always been very transparent about, and we always publish as well. Due to a significant reduction in the number of tickets issued, resulted in less income coming through, and we did make a deficit in the 2020-2021 financial year. That pretty much concludes the report. Apologies if I've glossed over anything too much, but I'm happy to take any queries or questions if there were any. Thank you.
Thank you. I would now like to invite members of the committee to ask questions. Do we have any questions? Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. First, I'd like to say that being a governor of Sir Francis Hill School, what's mentioned in the report, I'm very grateful for the fact of the car actually going round. It has progressed from there, because now it's just, you know, lack of idiotic parking where it used to be Wild West scene down there. The question I've got is, on page, I think it's 39, waivers issued by area, Lincoln seems to be well above everywhere else on 703. Why is the number so high in this category? Thank you.
Yes, no, that's fine. Thank you for your comments. Yeah, Lincoln has always been absolutely hugely increased in comparison to the rest of the county. We try and publicise via our website what can be provided. We've always been quite vocal about that. We do receive a large number of inquiries from whether it be a tradesperson or a resident of of the county, and we give advice. But I think historically, waivers always used to be issued in person from the council offices in Lincoln, and I think it was seen as a very easy means of visiting Lincoln to obtain the waiver. And as time's gone on, it's almost maintained at that level. I don't know the exact reasons behind it, to be perfectly honest, but yeah, it's something that we try and highlight to people, that this service is available if required. There's charges for waivers in place as well, so we again, that's advertised regularly, but specifically why it's that bigger, I honestly don't know, unfortunately.
Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chairman. A very satisfied comment, first of all. I felt I was clearly quite justified in highlighting St Thomas's School in my immediate area. I think it was Councillor Davis that I highlighted this too. I think they well and truly topped the chart as regards the number of PCNs issued, didn't they? So I felt right, I was justified in that one. And I like to think that now perhaps parking isn't quite as bad. Certainly a little car or a little man appears and it's amazing how they all melt away. All the cars, I mean. Right. I'm disorganised this morning, apologies. I didn't make my notes on ModGov, and I know I can't find them on the paper version. Town centre parking. Somewhere I saw that, you don't charge for town centre parking so as to not have a negative effect on the economy. I don't know where I read that, but why does Lincolnshire County Council actually charge for parking in Boston Marketplace, which I know belongs to yourselves, not us in Boston, but sometimes you have places where a road where you can park for, let's say, half an hour, 20 minutes, free, and then after that you have to move on. Is there any reason why you couldn't do that in Boston Marketplace? So you can have free parking for half an hour, but after that you'll jolly well get fined. But people moan, and it's this moan all the time that bugs me. Oh, I only wanted to pop into the bank. I mean, I don't go to my bank really. I do online banking, but, all these people seem obsessed by just popping into the bank and thinking, well, it's only 20 minutes or whatever. Has that ever been considered in Boston Marketplace? Not actually charging. Maybe you have to get a ticket, but it doesn't cost you anything, but at least it shows when you've arrived and, and parked. But that way, you recoup the cost, I hope, in the end by fining people, or if you don't, then well done. People are just doing half an hour and going away again. I know you don't do free parking for the non-stop because you'd get people who parked there all day and worked elsewhere in offices, and that's not what the marketplace is there for. So have you any comment on that one, please?
Yes, no, that's fine. Thank you, Councillor. I mean, with Boston, you're completely correct. There is on-street charges in the marketplace in Boston and in a couple of others, Pump Square, Station Approach as well. Wide Bargate, I think, might have as well. But if we rewind back to 2012, so a long time ago, when civil parking enforcement was introduced to Lincolnshire, our traffic order was consolidated, and those areas which are classed as on-street areas were actually previously called them car parks by Boston Borough. So the income from the parking bays or the payment meters for Boston are managed and administered by Boston Borough, whereas Lincolnshire County Council, we enforce the bays. I think historically, and Councillor Davis, I know you kind of had thoughts on discussions in the past about on-street parking charges, but Boston in itself was slightly different from the rest of the county, where we still have on-street free parking bays, limited waiting bays. There are still a large number in Boston, but those specific areas were brought in as part of our existing or part of the traffic order in 2012. And those payment charges came across with with the alteration as well.
Thank you. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the report. It's nicely laid out and easy to read, so thank you for that in the first place. Just one question. On page 34, on the most issued contravention codes, number 42, police vehicles. I'm presuming our police officers are not abandoning cars whilst they go and grab their lunch, so I'm presuming this is whilst in the line of duty. Please tell me these officers are not being charged, or if they have a way to get away from these tickets or not pay them, and if that's the case, why are we issuing them?
Yeah, no. Police vehicles are exempt from parking charges, or from enforcement, providing that they're obviously attending a job and on investigation, whatever it may be. We do have a number of police-specific bays in the county. So if, for example, a vehicle were to park in a police bay, then we could issue a penalty for a car being parked in it. There can be undercover police vehicles that park in them sometimes, and that may go through an appeals process, but that's what that's geared at, not specifically the type of vehicle, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Are there any Councillor Brooks?
Yeah, just a quick one. Yeah, the report is a really good report, easy to read and everything. I just note that a couple of years ago, Lincolnshire won the national award for the quality of this report. So, you know, and this is along the same line. So that's been recognised nationally, the way this report is constructed. And but just a quick question from the Transparency in Finance. It says that the deficit was taken out of CPE reserves. I just wondered how much is left in CPE reserves, because it doesn't say that anywhere, because there's a couple of years where we've had to take the money out of CPE reserves. I don't know whether you're able to answer that, Matt. Thanks.
First of all, thank you for your kind comments about the report. To be perfectly honest with you, I don't have the specific figures as to what's left in the reserve. It's something that I would need to take away from here and pass on, and if need be, we can kind of relay that back when we can. But I don't have that to hand, unfortunately.
Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Matt, thank you for a good report again. I think it must be, the fifth I've seen now. Always good, always informative. We had a spell where we weren't doing any enforcement. And I was just wondering, when the enforcement restarted, did we find that people have been taking advantage and parking in areas where they shouldn't have done, and that we had a lot more enforcement to do to start that again? Or did we find that actually the enforcement wasn't needed? Thanks a lot.
Thank you. No, you're correct to mention that. During the lockdown period, when we weren't issuing tickets, so to speak, we conducted like a sign and line survey, not throughout the county, but in a lot of areas, and we tried to keep track as much as possible of what parking habits there were, if bays were still being, or if restrictions were still being complied with. And to be honest, the longer time went on where enforcement wasn't taking place to the degree that it usually does take place, vehicles and motorists were parking where they wanted. Whether that be yellow lines or longer than permitted and limited waiting bays, resident permit bays. We obviously were at home for a significant portion of the time, so parking habits had changed in a sense of not commuting to work and going out as much as we used to. So there was a lot more cars parked, or there were many more cars parked in those bays close by to properties. But in the next breath, there was still the need for, say, healthcare workers or service users to have visits from people. So we had to kind of find that balance when we commenced enforcement again. The numbers weren't absolutely monumentally higher. They were relatively static and quite similar to previous kind of pre-COVID times, but we certainly had noticed a lot more people were reporting non-compliant parking to us, and that then obviously resulted in us recommencing enforcement, providing advice to people again, and then issuing tickets when required. Issuing the tickets always a last resort. A ticket will be issued if required, obviously, but we try and give words of advice when we can. But yeah, that's hopefully that's answered the question. But it was certainly noticed when we weren't patrolling and enforcing, and then when we started in those early months.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. I can see no further speakers. So thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion for this item. I move that we endorse the report and approve its publication on the Council's website, and request that our comments from the debate are taken under consideration. Does anyone dissent? If so, indicate now. No, thank you, that is agreed. So moving on to item 8 of the agenda, the committee work programme. This item is on pages 69 to 72 of the agenda pack. This item enables the committee to comment on the content of its work programme. The report will be presented by Chiara, our scrutiny officer. The actions, the committee is invited to review the work programme and highlight any additional scrutiny activity which could be included for consideration in the work programme. Over to you, Chiara.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to inform members of this committee that since the circulation of the agenda, there hasn't been any changes in the work programme. However, I will be more than happy to capture any potential items or themes that you would like to explore in future meetings. Thank you. Councillor Stringle would like to speak.
Councillor Stringle.
Thank you, Chairman. Whether this is achievable or not, given that the City of Lincoln Council have now approved the Western Growth Corridor as an application for 3,200 houses, and the fact that in that plan, Highways England, if that's what it's still called, I believe it is changing its name, Highways England, who own the Skellingthorpe roundabout, are going to improve it. This may be not in the remit of the county. I'm not sure if Richard would agree, but the thing is, it would be nice to know somewhere in a future work programme what exactly is happening. It impacts greatly on the village of Skellingthorpe and indeed my patch, Birchwood, and neighbouring divisions as well, Hartsholme and Bootham. So I'd just like to see whether anything can be brought in. I've never seen it on a work programme yet in all the time, and I'm in my 9th year now on the county. I'd just like to see if I could get an update on that somewhere along the line. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Stringle. Can Karen Kassar respond, please, if possible? Councillor Davey.
Yeah, it doesn't really fall into.
Sorry.
It doesn't really fall into Karen's area. Development management is more what we're discussing here. But I think you're right, Eddie. I think it's such a significant impact on Lincoln and Lincolnshire. I think it's worthy of an update paper in light of the results and the feedback we've had. So yeah, I'll take that up and bring it back. And likewise, I think if members had other similar developments elsewhere in the county that they wanted something formally on the agenda for, I think it'd be noteworthy, because these sustainable urban developments, as they're sometimes nefariously called, do have a huge impact, and I think they're above and beyond the parochial matters, which I know you seek to avoid.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Are there any further comments? Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know whether Councillor Davis, could enlighten us. I see that on the 30th of May, it says speed limits review. Now, is this on all types of road, or we're not just talking like 30 and 40s, are we? You know, as I'm hoping that it's going to also include higher speeds than that.
Councillor Davis, can you? Oh, can you address that?
This is a scrutiny-led piece of work.
Yes, I would like to confirm, Councillor Austin, that it will be a generic review, but it will also include areas with imposed speed limits. So this is going to form part of this review, as previously discussed and brought in by Councillor Clark. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Austin.
If I take to Chiara, the one that I'm interested in, can she tell me, you know, outside this meeting, obviously, whether it will be included is something that I am actually pursuing on the A16 itself, coming out of Boston, where I'm trying to get a lower limit. Thank you.
Yes, most certainly. We can speak outside this meeting and make sure that we include that. Thank you.
Any further questions, comments? No. I move that we note the report and approve the existing work programme as detailed in pages 101 to 105 and the additional items that have been discussed today. Does anyone dissent? No. That is agreed. Thank you. That now concludes the business of the meeting. Thank you everyone for your attendance. Thank you.